Hey class, hope you made it through the cold snap last week. Okay, I guess the power grid held up this year, which is great. A couple of things right off the top. First of all, the first midterm is next week. Um, Traditionally in this class, I'd only given two midterms, but that just didn't work well. The students didn't seem to do well on the first midterm. It's very similar. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. It's quiz, multiple choice questions and all that, but it's a lot of questions. It's a lot of material. So I decided this semester to give three, what I call midterms, just to lower the stakes a little bit on these tests. So it's done to help you not make your life miserable. So it'll be about, I haven't decided, it'll be about 40 questions. I'll post a study guide, and you can use an index card, which I highly advise. Of course, I can't stop you from cheating. I can't go into your room or wherever you take the test and what can I say? I'm not dumb. I know cheating goes on. I'm sure the person listening to this is not cheating, but we know it's out there. So what I do is instead, it's just like I let you use a 3x5 index card to write down dates and facts and figures that you just can't keep in your mind, and just to help you organize your thoughts instead of thumbing through your notes, which I think can drive students crazy and actually can hurt your grade, because you only have a certain amount of time to take these tests. So you do have my permission. You're welcome to use a 3x5 card just to write down the facts and figures you can't keep track of. I'll post a study guide for this midterm later in the week. Okay. Now the second thing is in beginning with this set of podcasts, the week's 4 set of podcasts, and the reading, Forget the Alamo. What is it called? Yeah, it's called Forget the Alamo. We're transitioning into the period of Texas history that is probably familiar to most of you. This is the period where Anglos start coming into Texas, beginning with Moses Austin, and he dies very quickly, and his son Stephen F. Austin, in the period where Texas is transitioning from Spanish rule to Mexican rule. One of the dates I want you to know is 1821. That's when Texas becomes Mexican. That's when Spain is kicked out of North America, after ruling North America since, I guess, 1492, really, the arrival of Columbus. So that's a key date. And what happened simultaneously with that is that Spain first, and then Mexico during this transition period, allow Anglo settlers to come into their northeastern frontier, which is Texas, in a desperate attempt to try to populate Texas. This is one of the big issues that I've made this semester. Spain leaves a permanent impact on Texas. Think about rivers and all the sites that are Spanish. Think about the Spanish language, the Catholic Church. San Antonio is from the Spanish period, Nacogdoches, Goliad. So Spain, the property rights for women, the cattle industry, vaqueros, the rodeo, that's a Spanish legacy. So that's true. But on the other hand, there were never very many Spanish here. It just shows the power of a society that has written rules and laws. There are many more Comanche in Texas during this period than Spanish, but the Comanche left almost no trace on Texas. They left no laws. They left no geographical figures named. The Spanish did, because they came in with a kind of an organized society that could leave its mark in a way that the Comanche didn't, the nomadic people. Okay, so the Spain does leave its imprint on Texas as one of the things that makes Texas Texas, but the Spanish don't populate Texas to any great degree. as late as 1820, there's probably only about 3,500 people of European descent, 3,500 Tejanos in Texas, which is incredible when you think that there's hundreds of thousands of people across the border in Arkansas and Louisiana. Um, so what the legacy of this, the inability of Spain or the unwillingness of Spain to populate Texas, is Texas ultimately will be ripe for the picking. And by 1845, Texas will be a state in the United States. But let's go back to week 4. So we're looking at that transition when Anglos start coming into Texas. And Anglos come into Texas, and I'll say this many times, the ones that come, they want to come into Texas because land is cheap. And the majority of them want to grow cotton. The eastern part of Texas is some of the richest cotton growing producing area in the entire North American continent. And the Spanish hadn't even looked at cotton. They hadn't thought about growing cotton at all. So the key thing here is, and I'm going to say this a million times, there is an inextricable tie between the production of cotton and slavery. The Anglos that came into Texas to grow cotton, as was true of Anglos in the US South, they believed to the bottom of their heart that slavery had to be produced by slave labor. Okay, the two are inextricably linked. Cotton equals slavery, slavery equal cotton. Okay, that's a big deal for beginning now. And so what happens is that the Austins are successful in persuading first the Spanish and then the Mexican government to allow American families to come into Texas. The American families that come into Texas bring their slaves with them, or as many of them as possible that have slaves. Enslaved folks are very, very expensive. In today's dollars, a healthy male slave, and I'm talking about it like it's a business, and I'm being kind of bloodless here, but I know we're talking about an atrocity, right? But a healthy male slave would probably be in today's world worth about $60,000. So we're talking about slavery was a big business. That's one of the reasons we know so much about it, because it was a business. There's quite a bit of paper left about slavery. So for Texas, just to get to the main point, we're starting to see Anglos coming into Texas initially with the permission of the Spanish and then the Mexican government. And as many of the Anglos that can are bringing their slaves with them. And this begins tremendous amounts of fights between ultimately the Mexican government and Anglos about the nature of slavery. Would slavery exist in Texas? There were a lot of folks in Mexico, which was basically an anti-slavery nation, that wanted all slaves to be freed when they were 14. And so what we're seeing here is the beginning, the introduction of the slave society that was very powerful in the US. It's crossed the border, it's crossed the Sabine into Texas, beginning in the 1820s. And it's going to lead in ways that I talk about it. There's going to be a series of dominoes that fall that result in Texas breaking from Mexico. Okay, but we're not there yet. What we're talking about this week is the introduction of slavery into Mexico, into Mexican Texas. Remember, Texas is still part of Mexico at this point. And I just want to talk about how that happened, and I want to underline and emphasize the importance. Basically, what you have is one of my friends, Andrew Torget, writes, you basically have Mississippi moving into Mexico, in the sense that you have the slave US society along the Gulf Coast crossing the Sabine into Mexican Texas. And the consequences of this are going to be immense for Texas. They'll be immense for also the historical actors involved with this, especially slaves that are moved often against their will into Mexican Texas. There's a lot of family separation, and for the Anglos and for the Tejanos, who in many cases embrace, especially elite Tejanos, they embrace slavery, the introduction of slavery into Texas, because they want a piece of the global cotton economy because it's so lucrative. Okay, so that's what we'll be talking about this week, the introduction of slavery into Mexican Texas. You'll read about that in Forget the Alamo. and you'll be tested on the first part of the course next week.